Hello, welcome. I'm delighted you're here. I'm Olivia Mattis, and I'm very glad that you've joined us today for another program of the Sousa Mendez Foundation. Typically, we honor a hero, a rescuer, a great hero of resistance. Today, we're talking about the capture and trial of a criminal, a perpetrator. So it's very unusual for us, this kind of a program. We have as our guests an attorney, a historian, and a filmmaker. Our moderator, Dr. Shulamit Reinhartz, will introduce them. So, Shulamit, take it away.
Thank you, everybody, for participating in this. It's such a privilege for me to moderate. Wait till you hear our speakers today. They're extraordinary. We have a young man, Elliot Levitt, who you can see, I think, is sitting in front of a whole bunch of yellow Post-its, which are the notes creating the framework for his next film. He's a filmmaker who used this time with the COVID, during the COVID epidemic, to find materials about the Eichmann trial that are available to everybody and make a spellbinding film. You will enjoy him very much. We have Mordechai Paltiel. He is a regular participant in our programs because he is so knowledgeable. He spent 24 years working at Yad Vashem, where his job was to coordinate all the activities related to righteous among the nations or righteous Gentiles. Yad Vashem, as you all know, is in Jerusalem. He's also the author of 14 books, and two of them, which are very relevant to today, is a book called Righteous Among the Nations. You can probably get that online, which talks about the people who saved the Jews, such as the people who saved my parents. So I'm very indebted to Mordechai for all the work that he did there. He also wrote the book Saving One's Own, which concerns Jewish people who saved Jews, a somewhat neglected topic. And finally, we have TAMAR HAUSNER-RAVEH. She's calling in or zooming in from Israel, from Jerusalem, I believe, where Tamar is a practicing lawyer. And if you look at her middle name, Hausner, you know that she is related to Gideon Hausner. You got a thumbs up from Matt Breitenbach. Um, she was the daughter of Gideon Hausner, who was the prosecutor in the Eichmann trial. Tamar Hausner-RAVEH has written a book called When Eichmann Knocked on Our Door. And that book is on its way to being published, and you will find out more about that probably in today's talk. We're going to take we're going to take time very seriously because we have so many talented people. And so I want to start right away with Elliot Levitt, who's going to give us a presentation with a PowerPoint and who produced the film that you saw before today's discussion. Elliot.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Shula. Thank you to Olivia for organizing this. The Sousa Mendez Foundation is almost a perfect venue for talking about a topic like this because so much of Eichmann's defense was predicated on this idea that he was a bureaucrat, he was just a cog in the machine, there was nothing he could have done, he had to follow orders. And Sousa Mendez's own actions during the same time period really put the lie to that defense and show how one bureaucrat, one cog in the machine, really could make a difference. So I'm Elliot Levitt. I directed the movie The Eichmann Trial, which hopefully you've had a chance to watch. And if not, I think you have one more day. And of all the people you're going to hear from today, I'm probably the one who knows the least about the Eichmann Trial, even after having made the movie. You're going to hear from Mordechai. He'll speak to it from a historical perspective. And Tamar is going to talk about it from a personal perspective. There's not a lot I can add. So instead of talking about the trial itself, I'm going to talk about the one thing I probably am an expert on, and that's making a movie about the Eichmann Trial. Those of you who had a chance to watch the movie notice that it's a little bit unusual for a documentary. There's no narration in this movie. There are no interviews. There's no reenactments. It's just archival footage from beginning to end. And that's by design. I had been working for years as a uh, um, film editor. I had never directed anything before. And I'd always thought it would be interesting to make a movie just through editing, just by taking existing footage and editing it together. And I thought a trial would be an interesting topic. And very quickly that led me to the Eichmann trial, which was in fact the first trial that was filmed in its entirety. We're going to show a clip really quick from the film. This is kind of a behind the scenes look at the filming of the trial in 1961. So this is a look in the control room as the trial was being filmed live. There were 4 cameras. You can see the 4 monitors there, 2 men sitting in front of them who are editing the footage live, and they're editing it to a relatively new invention at the time, which is videotape. Those are reels of, I think it's 2-inch videotape, which was a pretty new thing. So the whole trial was put onto this videotape, and after it ended, those reels of videotape were copied onto video cassettes, and then recopied and duplicated and recopied. And by the time I sat down to make this movie in 2021, the trial was spread out in a very disorganized way across, I think it was about 240 of these video cassettes. And I had assumed that they'd be in some sort of chronological order, they'd be labeled in some way. No such luck. The tapes were really disorganized. I'll show you what I mean. This next slide shows you just one of these 240 tapes, what it looked like when I put it into my editing software. And you can see at the bottom those stripes of color. You may have to squint, but those show you the different sessions of the trial that appear on just this one-hour tape. So the first 15 minutes are a little excerpt from session 82. Then in the middle of a sentence, it jumps to session 87. Then in the middle of a sentence, after 7 or 8 minutes, it jumps to, I can't even see, session 70. So it goes backwards a couple weeks and then forward to another session. Session was at 73 and then 75. So, you know, this is just one of 100 and, or what did I say, 240 tapes that were like this. And so basically what I had was a big jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing, because it turns out a lot of the footage from the trial has been lost over the years. There were about 500 hours recorded, I believe, and only about 130 hours left. Still a lot of footage, but most of it is gone. So imagine you got a jigsaw puzzle, half the pieces are missing at least, and all the remaining pieces are roughly the same color, and you have to sort of figure out how to put it back together. So this next slide shows you what it looks like when the jigsaw puzzle comes back together. This is just one session of the trial. This is session 88. It's actually the session where the cross-examination of Eichmann begins. And if this looks like a mess, that's because it is. This is the result of taking little fragments of all these different tapes. I see someone asking how long. This was about 3 or 4 months of taking all these fragments and putting them together to try and form just this one session, session 88 of the trial. Each of those blue rectangles represents a different clip from a different tape. Those colored bars in the middle represent the different tapes that were put together just for this one session. So you can see 2117, then it's tape, a section from tape 2118, then another tape, then 2121, 2123. So the tapes are not totally sequential. They're little bits and pieces, and it was just, it was 3 or 4 months of work just to put together what was left of the trial. Like I said, most of it's gone, just so that I could sit down and watch the trial before I even started editing the movie. Once I started editing the movie, I wanted to do it in a way that was as visually interesting as possible. The trial was shot in a pretty straightforward way. When someone speaks, you would see that person. When the next person speaks, you'd see that person. And I wanted to try and cut together different pieces of the trial to give you a sense of what it was like to be in the courtroom. So you can see those yellow numbers in this scene from the film represent the different sessions that I'm using. So this is a shot from session 71. It was the best shot I could find of the lawyers entering the courtroom. Then I wanted us to see Eichmann walking in, and I found the best shot of Eichmann walking in happened to be from a different session. I think it was 85. We'll see it in a session, no, 107 is this shot. And then I wanted a reaction of the audience watching him walk in, and I pulled one from session 85. And then here we are, a shot from session 8. All of this is really supposed to just portray one session, session 1. But as you can see, I'm picking and choosing from different parts of the trial. And if I've done my job right, when you watch the movie, it plays as one seamless scene. But in fact, I'm sort of picking and choosing from different parts of the trial without hopefully misrepresenting anything, and showing, you know, I wanted to make sure the trial still was portrayed accurately what happened in the trial, but I wanted to also keep it interesting and make sure that you really felt like you were in the courtroom and you could see how Eichmann reacted to the witnesses, how the audiences reacted to Eichmann, how the judges reacted to the lawyers, and so on. There was a lot of great material in that 130 remaining hours, and it was hard to choose what should stay in the movie. The first cut of the film was probably about 2.5 hours long, which I knew was going to be way too long. I needed to keep it to hour and a half, hour 45. So a lot of things got cut out, not necessarily because they weren't good or weren't relevant, but because we just didn't have time. So I'm going to close my section of the presentation with a sort of a deleted scene. This was a moment from the trial that I edited together for that first cut that I then had to cut out just for purposes of time. And I chose this clip today specifically because we'll hear in a moment from TAMAR HAUSNER-RAVEH, the daughter of, TAMAR Hausner, the daughter of Gideon Hausner, the prosecutor. And this is a clip where I think Gideon Hausner does a particularly good bit of lawyering. This is from the cross-examination of Eichmann, and he's trying to pin Eichmann down on the topic of whether he was anti-Semitic or not. Eichmann insisted he was not an anti-Semite, that he was a friend to the Jews, but was only following orders when he arranged transports of Jews to the concentration camps. So this is a good bit of cross-examination conducted by Gideon Hausner.
תמיד היית אנטישמי חריף, נכון?
Ich war nie Antisemit, ich war aber Nationalist gewesen.
לשונך לא הייתה לשון אנטישמית בהתכתבות רשמית?
Ich bin mir nicht bewusst, dass ich jene gehässigen Verbalinjurien gebraucht hätte, deren sich normalerweise die Antisemiten zu bedienen befleißigten.
אני אעזור לך להיזכר. למשל במכתבך מ-8 לדצמבר 42, אתה אומר כך לגבי הבודדים האלה שרצו להינצל: שוב ניסיון הסוואה ומרמה יהודי. הנה תראה בפסקה הראשונה של המכתב.
Das ist ein Exposé, wie ich das schon erklärte, nicht von meinem Dezernat, auch nicht von meinem Amt, sondern diese Exposés bekamen wir und bezogen wir vom Amt 7. Und zwar hieß das Amt 7 wissenschaftliche Gegnererforschung.
אני מדבר על הערכת מאמצי היהודים הבודדים האלה להינצל, ואין לזה שום שייכות למשרד 7, זה אתה כותב. תיקח עמוד 719, אתה כותב: זה שוב יהיה מצד היהודים איזה מרמה מחוכמת. זאת לא לשון אנטישמית מובהקת?
Ich finde an dieser Schreibweise durchaus nichts Antisemitisches.
אני מבין שאין הסכמה בינינו מה זו אנטישמיות. אני מבין שאצלך יש לזה מובן חד משמעי ביותר. נעבור לדבר אחר.
And so with that, I'll hand you off to the daughter of Gideon Hausner and an esteemed lawyer in her own right, TAMAR HAUSNER.
Thank you very much, Elliot. I want to tell you that there were a lot of films made about the Eichmann trial. Most of them not doco like yours, but yours is really fantastic one. And I'll do my best to help you to screen it in Israel, because I think it's a very, very important one. And it's different, as you tried to show us, it's different from all the others. Very interesting, very professional. Thank you. Okay, I just asked for the clip to be put now, the opening speech. The opening speech of my father.
בבקשה, אדוני היועץ המשפטי.
בו אני עומד לפניכם, שופטי ישראל, ללמד קטגוריה על אדולף אייכמן. אין אני עומד יחידי. עמדי ניצבים כאן בשעה זו 6 מיליון קטגורים. אך הם לא יוכלו לקום על רגליהם, לשלוח אצבע מרשיעה כלפי תא הזכוכית ולזעוק כלפי היושב שם: אני מאשים. לפני שאברהם נערם בגבעות אושוויץ, בשדות טרבלינקה, נשטף בנהרות פולין, וקבריהם פזורים על פני אירופה, לאורכה הנה האנטישמיות שהופצה בעולם עודנה קיימת. התנועה הנאו-נאצית בעולם מנסה לספר באוזני הכל, לא מתו כל כך הרבה. בכלל לא הייתה השמדה. השמדת מיליונים של יהודים פירושה הייתה גם השמדת מיליונים של עדים, אך נותרו עוד עדים אחדים שיוכלו למסור על מראה עיניהם ויעידו על מה שראו ושמעו בתקופת השואה. במשפט זה נפגוש גם רוצח מסוג חדש. זה המבצע את מלאכת הדמים מעבר שולחן הכתיבה שלו. כבר הוא היה מפעיל תרי גזים. שיחת טלפון שלו מסיעה רכבות אל מרכזי השמדה. חתימתו הוא גוזר את דינם של אלפים, רבבות ומיליונים. הוא האיש אשר תכנן, יזם, ארגן והורה שאחרים ישפכו את אוקיינוס הדם. בכל דרכי הרצח, הגזל והעינויים. איש אחד היה, שידו הייתה כמעט רק ביהודים, עיסוקו בהם ובכליונם, חלקו במערכת משטר הרשע מוגבל אליהם. איש זה הוא אדולף אייכמן.
Okay, I'm always excited when I see and hear my father. On May 23rd, 1960, David Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister of Israel then, took the stand at the Knesset to give a very dramatic declaration. Adolf Eichmann was caught by the Mossad in Argentina and will stand trial in Jerusalem for his crimes against the Jewish people. Just 2 weeks before that dramatic moment, our family experienced a drama of its own. My father, Gideon, was appointed by the government as the Attorney General of the State of Israel. By the way, in the presentation, we saw Golda Meir, who was then the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we also saw Moshe Dayan. He was, I don't know if he was Chief of Staff or he was something in the army at that time. Anyway, our family experienced a drama of its own. My father, Gideon, was appointed as the Attorney General of the State of Israel. My father was then in his mid-40s. He was not a Sabra. He was not born in Israel. He was born and grew up in Lviv. Now it's in Ukraine. It was then Poland. His father, Dov Bernard, was the assistant of Theodor Herzl while he studied rabbinical studies in Vienna. Upon his return to Lvov, the father, he was appointed as chief rabbi of the city, and later on was elected with very other few Jews as member of the Polish parliament, the same. On the year of 1927, the Polish government came to my grandfather with an offer he could not refuse to serve as the Polish ambassador in Palestine. So he took his family, his wife, and 4 kids. The youngest was my father, and they settled in Tel Aviv. So I'm talking to you now thanks to the generosity of the Polish governments, since out of the 120,000 Jews who lived in the ghetto of Lvov at 1940, only 200 survived. So here we have a lawyer who has no family connection with the Holocaust, who takes upon himself what seems to be an almost impossible mission to be the spokesman of 6 million men, women, and children, and of all the survivors. The Eichmann trial was the first and only time in the history of Israel that the Attorney General himself decided to appear as chief prosecutor and appear in court every single day. The decision of my father changed at once his life and the life of our family. I remember how my father called for a small family meeting in the kitchen and told us that he will be gone for a long time for the preparations for the trial, that will last for a couple of months, intensive work round the clock, so we won't see much of him in the near future. And he was right. We saw very little of him. The preparation for the trial lasted for a year. On April 11, 1961, the trial opened in Bet Ha'am in Jerusalem. At the beginning, the judges heard the legal pleas of the defense regarding the lack of jurisdiction of the court to judge the defendant. Only after they were denied all these claims, my father started his famous opening speech, which we just watched. That speech became the symbol of the Eichmann trial, as it considered to be one of the most brilliant speeches ever given. It didn't come easily to him. I remember how father thought and rethought of every word. He read it to us in the evening before, and I thought it was very strong. Mother told us that he woke her at least twice that night, since he changed and rechanged few words and wanted her opinion. I believed he kept changing it until the very last moment, so that when you watch it, you see that he read it from his handwriting because there was no time to type it up. My father was talking in his opening speech about the witnesses. And I want to tell you that from the very beginning, he decided that the trial will be different from the Nuremberg trials that were based mostly on documents. He believed that it will be much more effective to hear the survivors speak and describe the horrors they experienced, rather than just present the documents, which could have been a much easier job. The prosecution could provide the court with 2 or 3 decrees signed by Adolf Eichmann to send the 500 Jews to Auschwitz in order to prove his guilt. That would definitely be sufficient for his conviction. But then the trial will miss the one and the only opportunity that we had to show the people in Israel and the rest of the world the horrors of the Holocaust, conducted mostly by the one who was in charge of the final solution of the Jewish problem, Obersturmführer Adolf Eichmann. That goal could have been achieved only by finding the right witnesses, and that was a very, very tough job. The survivors who came to Israel straight from the death camps did not get a very warm welcome by the Israelis. The stories of what happened to them seemed so unbelievable and unreal that sometimes even their own family and friends had their doubts as to the truth of the stories. That is why some of the survivors interviewed by the special unit of the police were very reluctant to testify in the trial. So my father invited them to our apartment, to a Hamish atmosphere, with my mother serving tea and homemade cookies. That is how I describe it in my book, which Shula just mentioned, when Eichmann knocked on our door, that's the name of the book, and the name of the chapter there is The Holocaust in the Living Room. Our living room at home in Jerusalem had heavy sliding doors with a lock. Through these doors, the Holocaust entered my ears, my heart, and my mind. And I just want to tell you about one witness that I saw and heard in our living room. Her name is Rivka Yoselevska, and she was telling her story. She was taken with her little daughter, 12 months old, in her arms to the forest. They were ordered to dig holes, and the SS shot them, and they fell into the ditches. So the SS guy came to her and asked her, whom do you want me to shoot first?
Huh.
You or your daughter? Before she was able to answer, he shot little Marta and she fell into the ditch. Then he shot Rivka and she also fell to the ditch. But as she says, I did not die. I was breathing, covered with corpse, and I succeeded to remove them to get out of the ditch. She was covered with blood and naked, and a peasant that passed by put a blanket on her and took her to his home. She came to Israel. She had a family. She said, when I'm telling that story to my family, they don't believe me. How can I convince a judge? How can I come to court and testify? I remember her cry, and I remember how my father convinced her that she will be a good witness and she will definitely convince the judges. I just mentioned her because of the two little boys that we heard about their destiny, the two redhead boys, Ariel and Kfir, also more or less the same age, that were choked by the Hamas. Same destiny, so many years later. And I'll end here, and what I have to say, I'll say in the end. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think your father was not only a great attorney general and a great prosecutor, but he was a hero in what he did in rescuing stories.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. And now we have Dr. Mordechai Paldiel, whom many of you know because he has been a panelist on many of our programs because he is so knowledgeable. And Mordechai, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. Yes, and hello to everyone. In the first slide, we see Hannah Arendt, and we see Deborah Lipstadt. Hannah Arendt, we all know her. She became more of a central character than Eichmann, not during, but after the trial, when she wrote a very controversial book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, in which she had some very harsh comments, such that the Nuremberg laws and Israeli laws of marriage between Jews and non-Jews were somehow similar, because in Israel too, Jews and non-Jews cannot get married. But she ends the book and she says, I'm still a Zionist. Much of the harsh criticism against her also was because she was a woman, which was then not really something acceptable. Now, about the trial legitimacy, some claimed it was better for Eichmann to be put before an international tribunal, since Eichmann's crime was against humanity, not merely against the Jews. Famous Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal mentioned there were millions of other non-Jews who were also killed by the Germans. And he said it's a good policy. It would be better to stop harping constantly on Jews as the perpetual victims. There were other victims. Nachum Goldman, the head of the Zionist organization, also, he wanted an Israeli tribunal, but will a leading non-Jewish non-Israeli judge on the panel. The defender was Servatius, the German attorney, and he made the following claims. Israel has no authority to judge Eichmann for the following reasons. The crimes were committed prior to Israel's existence. It was done on foreign soil, not on Israeli soil. against people who were not necessarily all Zionists. And as far as the judges, he claimed they cannot be impartial, but they'll be prejudicial. There's a conflict of interest because the judges are Jews. And all these claims were rejected by the court. Even Hannah Arendt says Israel has a right, just as Poles have a right to judge Nazis who committed crimes against Poles. Ben-Gurion, Prime Minister of Israel, said the Jews were singled out for destruction, therefore Israel has a right to judge Eichmann. If the French had been singled out for destruction, the French would have had a right to judge Eichmann. But there is another side to Ben-Gurion. He told Gideon Hausner, whenever mentioning Germany, always say Nazi Germany, not just Germany, because, as he said, Ben-Gurion, there was another Germany before the Nazis and another Germany after the Nazis. So just say Nazi Germany. This was then when Israel had negotiated with Germany the reparations agreement, and Ben-Gurion didn't want any harm to be caused to that. Hannah Arendt condemned the lax attitude towards German war criminals under the Adenauer regime. Many of the war criminals, the Nazi war criminals, were serving in the Adenauer establishment. Now, on the indictment, Eichmann was put on trial based on a 1950 law of Nazis and their collaborators. Actually, in 1950, that law was legislated to try Jews who collaborate like kapos, but nobody thought then that we would bring in a Nazi collaborator, non-Jewish. There was also another thing. There were defense witnesses, but they were afraid to come to Israel because under the 1950 law, they might be arrested as Nazis. So there were no defense witnesses at trial, but some of them submitted their testimonies from their places in Europe. The other thing is that Eichmann was presented as the chief culprit for the final solution, which he was not. He was not the chief culprit, but he played a big role. There were other agencies and individuals. So when the prosecutor put the onus on one man, it made him look, Eichmann, more mythical than real. Now, about survivors, at Nuremberg, the victims sat in judgment. Here, the victim representatives sat in judgment. Dozens of survivors testify. Again, we have to caution, many of the stories are not at all connected with Eichmann. Some of them were. The court constantly reminded Hausner to direct questions to relevancy of Eichmann. Now, one of the questions that Hausner asked the many witnesses, the many survivors, was, why did you not resist? It also came up, and he was criticized for that. Even Bruno Bettelheim, famous psychiatrist, said the Jews were groveling and silently walked to the gas chamber. They should have resisted. Now, we have to remember that Hausner meant to direct the question not to the survivors, but to the Israeli youth listening, to impress upon the importance of the Jewish state that knows how to defend itself, and to try for the Israeli youth to try to understand the world in which the survivors lived under Nazi rule. As Justice Beisky, who he was one of the witnesses, said, when he was asked the question, why didn't you resist? And he said, without arms and a hostile environment, even if we had broken out from the camp, where were we to go before we were going to be turned in because the environment was very hostile? As was mentioned here, until the trial, there was like a death of silence about the Holocaust in the Israeli public. And this was broken with the trial, and then came the Six-Day War and Yom Kippur War, and that connected Israelis with world Jewry again. Chaim Guri, famous Israeli poet, said, we must ask for forgiveness for have distracted the survivors. Anita Shapiro, a famous historian, says that the trial resettled Israel on a long and tortuous path back to the Jewish people. Now I'm getting to Eichmann. The interrogator who spoke to Eichmann before the trial, and what he wrote was, I was surprised. He's not the sort of a Nazi type that one sees in the movies, tall, blonde, with piercing blue eyes, brutal features, and dominating an audience. And here was a thin, balding man with nervous tics who looked utterly ordinary. Even Salzberg of the New York Times noted that Eichmann looked more Jewish than, according to conventional definitions, than the two sunburned Israeli guards as his side. But that led later on to Hannah Arendt to describe him under the banality of evil. You don't have to be a monstrous-looking person to do monstrous deeds. Now, about Eichmann, he was anti-Semitic, as most people in Germany were at the time. But Arendt claims that he was not a fanatical anti-Semite, like Hitler. No insane hatred of Jews, just a plain anti-Semite. He did not act of any deep ideological comment. He was not an illogical person. He was not very much educated. He was not a monstrous figure, not diabolical, but like ordinary people doing monstrous things. A desk-level bureaucrat. And she termed him a person with an inability to think. That's a famous statement by Hannah Arendt. Just a little cog, like so many others in the Nazi world, who, like others, carried out orders, and that he exemplified the banality of evil. The ordinariness and banality is what makes all the horrific actions of these little cogs so troubling. In his defense, Eichmann claimed that he was obliged to follow orders and never acted on his initiative. As a committed Nazi, he could not disobey orders from above, from Müller, Heydrich, Himmler, and Hitler. It is they, Eichmann claimed, who gave the orders. It is they who are responsible for the Holocaust, not himself. He was even a Zionist. You know, when he said I was a Zionist, there was a laughter in the gallery. Eichmann, a Zionist. He had read Herzl's The Jewish State, and he preferred negotiations with Zionists, since he called them idealists. They have an ideal to restore the Jews to their homeland. He even visited Palestine under the British then. He said they wanted to put the Jews on their feet and their own land. Was originally and when he came into when he came to Vienna, he organized the exit of 45,000 Jews in the shortest possible time. But there was another side of Eichmann. He visited Auschwitz and Treblinka and saw Jews being gassed. Although he was not responsible for what happened, there were other Nazis in charge there. But he knew what awaited the Jews that he put on trains. He also chose the most stringent options. Orders to deport one train load, he pushed for two, and filled them up with suffocating capacity of Jews. Especially, I'm going to skip over the Eichmann, what he did in Hungary. In Hungary, he deported 437,000 Jews in a period of 7 weeks. Now, when he was pronounced the death sentence, I'm coming to the death sentence, there was a problem. Some leading Israeli intellectuals, Martin Buber, Gershon Sholem, Leah Goldberg, Professor Shamel Berger, asked not to carry out the death sentence, but to turn him over to an international court, and they would decide what sort of sentence, because his crimes were so vast and so on. Ben-Gurion, who himself was opposed to include the death penalty in Israel's penal code, he told Martin Buber, I will ask the cabinet and what they will decide, and they had decided that he would be executed. Now, Hannah Arendt, I want to finish with a statement by Hannah Arendt. She supported the death penalty, but she explained the justification different than the reasoning given by the court. And she did it by rhetorically addressing Eichmann in her book as follows. And this is what Hannah Arendt says, and I think that's very important. Even if 80 million Germans had done as you did, this would not be an excuse for you. You have carried out a policy of mass murder. And just as you supported and carried out a policy of not wanting to share the earth with the Jewish people and the people of a number of other nations, as though you and your superiors had any right to determine who should and who should not inhabit the world, we find that no one, that is, no member of the human race, can be expected to want to share the earth with you. That is the reason, and the only reason, you must hang.
Wow.
Thank you.
You've all left me breathless, speakers. Our moderator, Shulamit, you will have a chance to moderate the audience questions in just a minute. Right now, I'm just going to take the floor back briefly to make some announcements. So audience members, please finish putting your questions into that chat box for our fascinating speakers. Okay, so here at the Sousa Mendes Foundation, we have 3 programs coming up in the month of March. We have 2 programs online, as we usually do, and we unusually have a program in person at the 92nd Street Y. So for those of you in the New York area, we hope you'll join us on March 16th at the 92nd Street Y. The week before, which is March 9th, we are showing a program. It's a free program having to do with an escape tunnel that was dug in Lithuania outside of Vilnius. And so, again, fascinating story, and it's free of charge. And then in 1 month's time, on March 23rd, we're going to be focusing on the hero Sugihara, the Japanese rescuer Sugihara. And we're privileged to have his granddaughter, Madoka Sugihara, who will be joining us from Japan. So if you're interested in the Sugihara story, or you know people who are, please encourage them to sign up. And right now we're going to see a little trailer for the film called Sugihara Survivors.
なぜユダヤ人というのはそんなに偏見を持たれ差別されるんだろうかというのが、いつも心の隅にありました。
We spent 6 months in Cuba. We had no visa to go anywhere. We tried to go to the United States or to go to Israel, but couldn't get the visas.
Sugihara was the only possible hope. They knew that they had to get out, and I don't know if they fully realized that he was truly the only hope.
その人の身元が今回判明したということでですね、これも非常に不思議な感じ何か目に見えないところでですね、力が働いているように感じました。
In the morning, a firing squad came out, and they shot number 1, number 3, number 5, number 7, number 9.
このソニアさんの身元が分かったというふうに判明したときはですね、長年探し求めていた恋人がようやく見つかったというふうな、感じを受けたんです。
It's important to tell this story because people do need to be inspired by acts of courage and goodness by other people. It may lead them to do it too.
お子さんたちにこの写真を返してあげるということですね。今度はまた別れの時が来たのかなという。
Okay, so Shulamit, take it away for the audience questions.
Okay. One observation that I have from all of the questions is that many questions are directed to Elliot. So Elliot, somebody wrote, why did you include material about the witness who had a long, strange story about potatoes, kartoffel? Was it because it seemed to make Eichmann smirk or smile? Could you answer, but very briefly?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, the story about being disguised as a sack of potatoes in itself is not that interesting, but it was an interesting moment in the trial where Eichmann, who's usually described as being very stoic and very cold and not showing emotion, does sort of start to snicker a little bit. I thought it was an interesting moment.
Okay. Some people have asked for a link to Elliot's film. I'm going to leave that to you, Olivia, to take care of. Somebody claimed that recently more tapes were found, Elliot. that prove that that Eichmann was in fact a virulent anti-Semite. Is that correct? Or is that just
Yeah,
an urban legend?
they were found some time ago, but they've been discussed more recently. That some tapes from an interview he did while he was hiding in Argentina after the war, but before his capture by Israel, that a little bit better show his real attitude toward Jewish people.
There's a question I can answer. Where is Eichmann buried? He is not buried. His ashes were scattered at sea so that there would be no memorial place that people could gather to honor his memory. Next slide. And I think that was the correct choice. Another question to you, is there a film of the complete trial?
So, like I said, most of the footage from the trial is lost, but I love the question because it gives me a chance to talk about something I've been working on for almost a year since the movie came out, which is I have been taking the footage from the trial that does exist, that I had painstakingly organized, and I've been putting it on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/the @the Eichmann Trial, youtube.com/@the Eichmann Trial. I put on about once a week, I upload a new session. So I think the first 83 or 84 sessions are on now. There's 120 total. So sometime this summer, I'll get the whole thing up there. But that's where you can actually watch the whole raw footage of the trial, what remains. If you've got 130 hours to spare and you want to watch the Eichmann trial.
Matthew, maybe you can help make that information available. Here's another one. Eichmann was accused of having killed with his own hands a Jewish boy who worked in his garden in Budapest. Was this charge ever verified? Do you know?
It was actually verified. Well, it was half verified. Literally a month ago, there was an article in Haaretz, you can look it up, where someone basically found this boy who one of the witnesses said Eichmann had killed. And you can read the article on Haaretz, but the short version is that the story was that he had gone into this shed, beat this boy to a pulp, and then his body was dragged off and dropped in the Danube. The story is true. There was a boy, he was beaten, but the boy actually survived. And I can't remember if he's still alive today or recently passed away. But it was in January in Haaretz.
I'm not convicted for that.
What did you say, Tamar?
I said that Eichmann, because there were no witnesses there then he got free. I mean, nothing happened to him at this
at that time. Right. Why did you choose to make this film, Elliot?
Well, like I said, it was I made it a little bit backwards. I decided on a format first. I wanted to make a movie using just archival footage and nothing else. And I thought a trial would be an interesting topic. I started looking at trials that had been filmed all the way through, and the Eichmann trial was the first trial that had been filmed all the way through. So obviously I found the topic fascinating. I knew a little bit about it, but the more I learned, the more I was interested in it, and that's what led me to the topic.
I think you are the person who made the best use of the epidemic. Of anyone who's heard.
It certainly kept me busy.
Okay, and there are other questions here, like what happened to the gentleman who was a witness to his wife and children going left, and then he collapsed in the trial?
Katsetnik.
Well, not Katsetnik. It was the guy who talked about his daughter in the red dress, I think is what they're asking about. I don't know what happened to him afterward. I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. I'm not sure where he is now.
I'm sure the research can be done. Maybe someone can contact Tamar and she could find out.
Dinur.
Well, Dinur was the one who passed out on the stand, but I think they're asking about a different.
Katsetnik wrote many books about the Holocaust. Finally, he got some modern treatment, and there is a nice film made of him, about this treat.
If you can get that information to Olivia, she can maybe give it to Matthew and we can continue. Here we go. Tamar, a question for you. Is the book going to be written in Hebrew or English? And if it's written in Hebrew, will it be translated?
It was written in Hebrew by הוצאת ידיעות אחרונות. It's in the Hebrew site called Ivrit. And now I'm negotiating, maybe I put it in Amazon or maybe another publishing house in English.
Okay, so we don't know for sure. So here is Johanna Cooper with a lot of questions. And yes, two of them are for Elliot. For what purpose was the trial filmed? That's a good question.
Yeah, it was filmed. So Ben-Gurion, who was sort of orchestrating the trial a little bit from his position as prime minister, really felt it was important that it was what today we would call a teachable moment. It was an opportunity to teach the world about the Holocaust because, as hopefully the documentary makes clear, the Holocaust wasn't really taught in schools, in high schools or colleges at the time. So he thought, here's an opportunity to sort of, in a visual way, educate people about the Holocaust. So he contracted an American broadcasting company to come to Israel, film the trial, and then they would sort of create highlights reels, so to speak, at the end of every day of the most interesting moments from that day. They would ship those overnight around the world, and so you could wake up the next morning in Paris or in Washington, D.C., or in Berlin and watch excerpts from the Eichmann trial that had happened the day before or a couple days before.
Some of these other ones I can answer. There was simultaneous translation in the courtroom. The person also asked, are people who are not wearing headphones because they understood the language? The answer is yes. Somebody agreed with me that the prosecutor is the hero of this program. And somebody wrote, I had no idea what it took to put the trial together. And a lot of people just said it's extraordinary. I remember watching the trial on TV when I came home for lunch in the 3rd grade. I will always remember the smirk on his face. I want to skip a question and go to my grandparents were able to attend one of the days of the Eichmann trial. I realized they were able to do so because my uncle was a Mossad agent. As a child, I didn't know enough to ask questions. So, I mean, we had, I don't know, 160, 70 people here today, and they were all so engaged in everybody's conversation. And unfortunately, I have to stop now. Many of them were just compliments, not just. Many of them were compliments for the great presentations here. And now we have a part of the program that is very important, which is the final thoughts. So we have a little bit of a different format today. We're going to ask Mordechai to give final thoughts that are on a slightly different topic. It's totally related. And his topic you will hear about in a minute. He's very interested in Nazis or German army members who saved Jews. For the 99.99% of the Germans and the Nazis did not save Jews, but he has 50 good cases of this, and he would like to show us some information about that. He didn't want us to leave with only Eichmann on our minds. Mordechai?
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's not only Germans, but people from all over Europe who saved Jews and so on. I just want to start to say about the Japanese man, Chiyoni Sugihara. I was very much involved in having him honored as a righteous among the nations while I was at Yad Vashem. I built up his case. Now, I want to go, and I mentioned Abba Kovner, who testified at the trial. And he mentioned what was happening in Vilna, the killings of thousands of Jews in the Ponari forest. But then, during his testimony, Abba Kovner mentioned the name of Anton Schmidt, a sergeant in the German army.
Mordechai, why don't you just give one sentence about who Abba Kovner is? He's a hero.
Abba Kovner is a big hero. He's the one that issued the famous call, the Jews don't go to the slaughter. The Germans are planning to exterminate us all. Try to resist. That's the first call by a Jewish underground person in the Vilna ghetto. People did not believe, of course, people did not believe that even after the Holocaust. It was hard to believe that there was a master plan to exterminate all the Jews, not something localized. But anyway, and then he created the partisan, an underground organization in Vilna, and then he escaped into the forest and he fought as a partisan. After he survived, after the war, he came to Israel, and he spoke a lot about the Holocaust. He was also an educator, and I met him personally. I knew him. One of the Polish women that helped him, Irena Adamowicz, we planted a tree for her, and he was there. He planted the tree, and he has since died. We had a program on our governor, one of the Sunday programs. But I want to say he testified during the trial about what was happening in Vilna. And then he said that he mentioned the name of Anton Schmidt, that's the fellow with the mustache on the right, a sergeant in the German army.
Sergeant.
A sergeant, I'm sorry, who helped Jewish partisans in Vilna by supplying them with forged papers, arms, and transportation. He was eventually arrested, placed before a military court trial, and executed. Now, Hannah Arendt writes about this. As Kovner told of the help from a German sergeant, a hush settled over the courtroom. It was as though the audience had spontaneously decided to observe the usual 2-minute silence in honor of Anton Schmidt. And in those 2 minutes, which like a sudden burst of light in the midst of impenetrable, unfathomable darkness, a single thought stood out clearly, irrefutably, beyond question, how utterly different everything would be today in this courtroom in Israel, in Germany, and all over Europe, and perhaps everywhere in the world, if only more such stories could have been told. End of what Hannah Arendt. Now I want to say, well, there were many more such Anton Schmidts. Not too many, unfortunately, but still thousands and tens of thousands of them, starting with Susan Mendes and the thousands of others honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations, such as the 54, those on the playing cards here, that we, with all some of these photos of playing cards that we produced last year. So I am turning to the wonderful audience. If you share our idea that we ought to mention more of these righteous people so as to highlight the goodness of their deeds to offset the evilness of persons like Eichmann, then please help us with your contributions to the Susan Mendes Foundation. Thank you.
And now another concluding remark. We will have Tamar.
Okay, I won't be as generous as Mordechai. I want to talk about nowadays. And I want to say that I hope that exactly as the Mossad caught Eichmann and brought him to trial, they will also get all the criminals of Hamas and Jihad and others who really did all these horrible things, and will bring them to justice. I don't mind if they have a grave or don't have a grave, but they'll have to pay for what they did.
That is a lesson that ties the Holocaust to our present day. Everyone is always mentioning that the worst day of killing Jews since the Holocaust was October 7th.
By the way, in Israel, there is a big discussion, especially among survivors, whether we can call it Holocaust Shoah, we cannot call it a Holocaust Shoah. So I just want to cite a guy, the one who was sitting next to my father, the police officer, Mickey Goldman, a very famous guy, who just issued a book about his 81 whips. And he's now 99 years old. Mordechai was also in the committee, right, of the righteous?
Yes, in fact, I brought him into the committee.
Ah, really?
Yes.
Another good deed of Mordechai Baltiel.
Anyway, so he claims that you cannot compare this to Holocaust, but it definitely was at least a one-day Holocaust, and those kidnapped in the tunnels are also suffering the same.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we have Purim coming up with another potential Holocaust. I mean, they unfortunately, they characterize our history. And now Elliot, the man of the day. What would you like to say as your last thoughts on this?
We've heard me talk enough already. Yeah, I mean, I'll again reiterate that for people who want to for people who want to watch the film who haven't had a chance, you could do it through the Susan Mendes Foundation for one more day. Or if you want to tell friends about it, eichmanntrial.com is the website, and there's links to places where you can get it. It's in a lot of libraries now. Your local library might have a copy on DVD. And if you want to watch the trial in its entirety, at least in terms of what remains, like I said, on YouTube, I've been putting painstakingly subtitling all of these sessions and getting them into order and putting them up on YouTube. So there are still ways to, hopefully the trial will stay there for a long time as sort of a way of combating Holocaust denial and educating people about what I think is a really important event in world history, and especially in the history of our understanding of the Holocaust.
So Shula,
And as moderator, I actually have a minute to say something myself.
absolutely.
I'm grateful to Olivia for giving me. I have a book here called Hiding in Holland. My purpose is not to make sure you buy my book at all, but to tell you that the Hiding in Holland, a resistance memoir, that's my father learning to milk a cow. The reason I wanted to emphasize the subtitle, a resistance memoir, is that people are saying to the Jews, why didn't you resist? That depends on how you define the word resist. People in the camps were resisting every day, resisting just to stay alive, resisting to help another person, resisting to not let their minds be occupied with the horror around them. There is a real mistake when we say resistance is only armed resistance. There are two forms of resistance, and one of the forms is called unarmed resistance, and that's what this book is all about. How this man who hid in Holland resisted for 3 years while he was in hiding, and fortunately he survived so that I could be born right after the war in 1946. So I thank you for the opportunity, Olivia, to moderate the discussion, and I would like to turn the floor back to you for a final word.
Good. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our wonderful audience and our fascinating speakers. We could have gone on another hour or two, but you have access to the film until tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks again. See you all on March 9th for Holocaust Escape Tunnel, March 16th, 92nd Street Y, March 23rd, our program about Sugihara. See you in March. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Be well. Take care.
Bye.